Well, good morning, EK Bailey Conference. I'm excited to be here. I'm Lisa Fields, the founder and CEO of the Jew 3 Project, and I'm excited that Jew 3 Project is able to act as a sponsor for this conference, and this will act as a Courageous Conversation pop-up for those of you who are familiar with our Courageous Conversations conference. And so I'm excited that Pastor Carter allowed us to do this here as a part of our sponsorship. And so I'm thankful for this amazing panel, and we'll dive right into it on conversations on liberation then and now. And so I want to ask the question first: how does the oppression faced by the Israelites in Exodus mirror or differ from forms of systematic oppression we see in the world today? Anybody can take a stab at that. Dr. Gardner.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for that question. I think immediately we see the limitation of freedom, the disenfranchisement of God's people in the text of Exodus, which is a mirror of what we see today in terms of mass incarceration. The EJI.org, Brian Stevenson, has given specific data to suggest that America is 5% of the world's human population, but yet we have 25% of the world's prison population, meaning that the United States of America incarcerates more people than any country on the planet. So then when we look at the demographics of that incarcerated population, African Americans hover somewhere 14-15% of the US population, but we represent upwards of 47-48% of that prison population. So we see that mirror, the incarceration mirror the enslavement in the text.
Can I just add this? One of the things that is interesting, and I want to thank Pastor Carter and you for this conversation, because so many times in the summer when our church conferences meet, they have themes that have nothing to do with what's happening in the world around us. And as I shared with Pastor Carter, he and God must have known that last week was going to happen, where Congress and the president got together to basically create a bill that kills, lethal legislation that is a reflection of what's happening in Exodus at the beginning. So I want to thank you for courageously hearing from God so that we could have a relevant, courageous conversation, which y'all are about. So I begin with this. For me, think about the fact that in Exodus, it all begins with fear. Those who are in power are afraid of the explosive growth and success of those that they now other as minorities. And whatever else I've discovered about oppression, which again, it continues to operate the same way. And in this country right now, you have a situation where there are those who are talking about Jews will not replace us. There's a concern about the fact that 2053, minorities will be the majority in this country. And so those who have been in the majority have this fear rooted in guilt. We know what we did to them when we were in the majority. What are they going to do to us when we are a part of the minority? So first of all, oppression always starts in fear. And once you fear, then you have to otherize the one that you fear and criminalize and make them out to be what? The enemy that we should fear. And that's all in Exodus chapter 1. And that's what has happened in this country. There is a fear that somehow those of us who have been othered are going to rise up and do what has been done to us. And most of us just want to be left alone to live our best life. And so it's a trip that, again, this oppression operates in the same way. And then watch this. There's the economic factor of oppression, because oppression and economics always go together. Martin King put it like this: the evil triplets in this country are militarism, racism, and economic exploitation of capitalism that results in poverty. And so what do we see in chapter 1, verse 11? That they begin to exploit the people economically. And so the have-gots were exploiting the have-nots. And we see all of that going on right now. And so really, Exodus lets us know ain't nothing new oppression-wise under the sun, and we are experiencing a repeat of what has been going on, and now we have, again, various manifestations in terms of what this oppression looks like.
Thank you. Dr. Brown?
Dr. Renita Weems says that Egypt is a symbol of forces that endeavor to grind people down so that they can stay in power. And for as much as oppression in Egypt was economic, right? It was ethnic. It was also reproductive. So Dr. Mitzi Smith identifies the reproductive oppression there. And we live right now, black women in this country are more than the maternal mortality rate is more than 3 times greater than that of white, Asian, and Hispanic counterparts. And that's not just because of makeup, but their systemic issues. Lack of access to health care, lack of access to healthy foods, right, in our neighborhoods, or the funding, right, that is decreased in a lot of our neighborhoods that contribute to what happens. And then when you look at our school systems, so if it's not take the mothers out and the babies with them, as our kids are growing, they're not learning, right? They're still underperforming. And these are connected to some very deep-rooted systemic issues that where structures were created for our children to fail. So I think that that's a way that it also mirrors, that take out the generation that is to come so that we can remain in power.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo this socioeconomic element to it, because when you look at Exodus 14, you hear Pharaoh say, "What have we done? Our entire workforce has left us." So this oppression is highly economic. And when you look at it today, you can see human trafficking plays a role in that. You have human trafficking taking place in call centers in places like the Philippines and Vietnam. We just did an article on this in Christianity Today. So these cartels will prey on the poor and needy, pull them into call centers, sell the call center to a US company, and then say for pennies on a dollar, you can get somebody to answer the phone. We don't even recognize what's happening. But I can tell you the greatest frustration for me is when people try to co-opt this socioeconomic, this militaristic, this race-oriented oppression and make it their oppression. This is a very specific type of oppression. Teenagers are not oppressed when they cannot order DoorDash because mom says no. People who have made certain choices or struggle with certain things do not get to co-opt a certain movement of oppression and say, this is my exodus, my coming out. No, biblically speaking, there are specific elements that make a people oppressed where God steps in and says, I will free you. And that's why I think it's important what we're talking about here. It's militaristic, it's socioeconomic, but it's not just, I don't like where I am and I need the world to understand that I am oppressed.
Thank you. That's helpful. Dr. Smith?
You know, I often think about the Pharaoh that had arisen who knew not Joseph. And what makes me interested is what were the theological ramifications that allowed the laws to be in place? What type of philosophical ideologies allowed those laws of oppression and marginalization to happen? I think that's very, very important, because I don't know if Pharaoh made that decision on his own. I often wonder who was in his cabinet, who was in his ear that allowed such a shift of antagonism toward the Hebrew people. And unfortunately, when I think about what has happened in our country, there's always been a sense of unity between theological and political complicity. And unfortunately, when we have too many of us who have co-opted the throne of God and the kingdom of Jesus Christ by suggesting that this new administration represents the best of the kingdom of heaven, is problematic. And what I see is a lot of persons, even, and this is not political, you vote your own, your own preferences and your own choices, but I just think it's problematic when so many of us can communicate the name Jesus but don't demonstrate the nature of Jesus. And so I think there's a theological efficacy that's tied into Pharaoh's ability to shift in perspective toward the Hebrew people. And I think that's the greater challenge. Too many of us have created environments that have allowed the laws to change. And that's where our voices have gotten silent.
Thank you for that. That is so, so true. That leads us, I'm glad you brought up Pharaoh, because that leads us to our next question. What are the contemporary pharaohs that stand in the way of liberation for marginalized communities? How can the church identify and challenge these modern power structures?
Well, I mean, in all fairness, Pharaoh doesn't always have a different pigmentation. And if we're not careful, we can, from an ecclesial perspective, become Pharaoh. I think when you think about the shift in culture and theology and what the black church meant from the civil rights movement, from Plessy versus Ferguson up to Montgomery bus boycott, I think this whole rise of health and wealth and prosperity gospel has made us less communicative and less community. And it has also unintentionally made us ecclesiastical pharaohs, where now in a white supremacist way, the black preacher can become Pharaoh when the emphasis is money and not the community. So the question is, have we become Pharaoh?
Wow.
So it's very interesting that economics is always the common denominator. From the White House to the church house, economics becomes that weaponizing feature that results in oppression. And so I think it's very important. Again, I keep going back to Dr. King because he said the evil triplets were not just racism and militarism, but he attacked, thank you, Danielle, he attacked capitalism, which a lot of us have a hard time dealing with because of the capitalization of Christianity. The church has become as capitalistic as the nation in which we find ourselves. And I'm not judging because of the fact that we got bills to pay. You talk about a mega church, you got mega bills, you got a mega mortgage. And so I understand that, but if you're not careful, you become Trump-like in your pastoral charge, because it's all about getting those bills paid and making that money. And so I think it's very important that systemically we understand spiritually the spirit of capitalism that can infect the church. And as a consequence, instead of emphasizing stewardship of what God has blessed us with, we get caught up in the spirit of capitalism so that we can make money, and we have to manipulate people into giving money and somehow tell them that God is some kind of theological Santa Claus, that if you give God this much money, then God will come through with these Christmas presents for you. And so capitalism is a dangerous spirit in this country. It's a spirit of oppression. It is a spirit of Pharaoh. And I love what you're saying, Edu, because the bottom line is the spirit of Pharaoh can infect and become a part of the body politic of the church. And that's a dangerous Pharaoh, because it's easy to talk about Pharaoh as long as he's orange. It's difficult to talk about Pharaoh when Pharaoh is in the mirror.
Does anyone want to add to that? Well, next question. What does it mean to preach liberation in a way that is both biblically faithful and culturally relevant in our social and political landscape?
I'll take a stab at it. I think, first of all, sometimes we like to exclude the two elements of liberation. God liberates a people, but not an individual, or God liberates only individuals, but not a people. God does both at all times. But I think it was one of the panelists yesterday who reminded us, this is not liberation for liberation's sake. This is liberation for what Paul calls bondage. I've been freed by Christ so that I can be a slave to Christ. And reorienting our understanding of liberation is critically important for our culture. I think critically important for younger generations. Younger generations can often be obsessed with this idea of freedom. I just want to be free. I want to be free from the laws and free from other people's ideas. But freedom doesn't discount accountability. You still have to be accountable in your freedom. Freedom doesn't discount your ability to crucify the flesh so that you might live like Christ. And then as you walk out that freedom, your freedom is never truly free if your people are bound. I was in a Jewish evangelical conversation, and it was a hard conversation. There were a lot of dynamics in that room. But as I was listening to the rabbis speak, there's a kind of a connection that they have with each other. And at lunch, one of the rabbis said to me, I don't understand why you Christians aren't upset about Christians being persecuted around the world. He said, we Jews, we hold each other together so that I weep when Jerusalem is under attack. I cry when Jews are persecuted in other parts of the world. Do you cry, he said, when Christians are persecuted around the world? And it hit me that this idea of kind of solidarity means I must weep if I am experiencing a level of freedom that my brothers and sisters don't have. So it is a both and. It is both systematic and it's individual. It is freedom from to be bound to, but it is very, very much a matter of me seeing myself as a part of something larger and not just an individual thing.
Dr. Gardner?
In 2018, I had the opportunity to go to Ghana to serve for about 2 weeks, training some pastors. And we served at a compound about 4 miles outside of Kumasi. David Misner has an amazing ministry there. He's, of course, a Ghanaian. And over a conversation, I asked him what was his motivation for doing what he does. And he said, until you have smelt poverty and felt poverty, you never forget it. And I think that to preach prophetically, preachers have to be willing to smell it, to feel it in the masses. You may not have grown up in that situation, but the masses of people, says Howard Thurman, still constantly live with their backs against the wall. In Joshua 1, we're talking about Exodus, Pentateuch. Joshua 1 refers to Moses as the servant of the Lord. Moses, my servant, is dead. Moses, the servant of the Lord. I don't think that we have much to say in our preaching if we're not willing to serve. Yes. And I think the powerful preaching that what we're witnessing, the powerful preaching that we heard last night from these two ladies, women of God, is a result of not just their brilliance, but I would be willing to bet that these are women who have wept with people, not with just a person, but with people, who sat with mothers whose sons and daughters have been sentenced to years of imprisonment for petty drug crimes, who've been with a people, a community that have felt the sting of living in food deserts. So I think preaching prophetically is not just knowing the text. It's not just eloquence and brilliance. It's being willing to live incarnationally with people, being able, as Ezekiel, to sit where they sat. And I think the responsibility comes when we know people, when we feel their pain, when we're willing to sit in that dehumanization with them, but also be willing to risk our reputation, our life, if willing to do something about it. I think that's responsible proclamation.
And I think with that this relationship piece, right, that understanding context has to go beyond statistics and profiles that we can find about certain places. But if we're going to responsibly preach liberation, right, and be faithful to the context and the culture in which we serve, when was the last time you had a conversation with the actual people? Right, and we make a lot of decisions from the black pulpit about what the black community needs, and a lot of times the black community is not even at the table to say what they need. And we have to be honest about that. A lot of times the black pulpit is privileged. Just look at us. How many degrees, right, are just up here on the panel? Right? That there is a certain way or way that we view the world from where we sit, that we can't decide for everybody because we don't know the pieces, that if we move this, what does that mean for Mother Jones who doesn't have the privilege that we have? That if we lobby against this, but what does that mean for these people who will hurt, right? Who will be damaged even further? That while we're calling for liberation over here, our liberation, void of those conversations, can create more trauma and struggle for people where we now become Pharaoh. And then when you ask the people, what do you think about X, Y, and Z, you may find out that they really don't care. Because what is a priority thing for you from your place of privilege? From your ability to have a little extra money on the side, from your ability to drive out and get health care wherever you like, may not be the priority matters for the folks who need liberation the most.
I think it's fair to say there's a bit of subjectivity to liberation. Because for me, liberation, of course, when you think about it in this context from Latin America to Cone, for me, for a long time, liberation looked like freedom from the man. And freedom from the powers to be. And that was the scope of liberation. It's freedom from racism, freedom from marginalization that has taken place historically in this country. But as I look now in terms of your question, I pastor in Atlanta. And when I pastor in Atlanta, when I moved to Atlanta, when you think about what's happening there, particularly with the LGBTQ community, when I moved to Atlanta 37 years ago, the male to female population was 9 women to every 1 man. And because of the large contingent of the LGBT community, at that time, I wanted all 9 of mine, and I'll take somebody else's 9, right? But I'm saying that in this context, I'm being honest. But I'm saying this. What does liberation look like to members of the LGBTQ community? For those of us who have a perspective, is it just preaching you need to be free? And what is the process if that's our expectation? So I think sometimes what does liberation look like to a trans person? What does liberation look like to a person who has been incarcerated for 25 years? So I think in a lot of ways we limit liberation to what the Republicans are doing. But I think we have not really, what does liberation look like to the 70% of African American women who won't get married in Atlanta by 2030? But my theological lens says you have to wait for Boaz to come. And for 70% of them in 5 years, Boaz is not coming. So what does my preachment look like to those 70% of African American women who won't get married in 5 years? No intimacy, no relationship, no connectivity. I think sometimes we have to be careful that our preachment doesn't become theological violence. So what does liberation look like? How do I be true to the text without becoming Pharaoh to that group who has to reimagine life because of how we have seen the text and how we see the text? What does that mean to them? Is it God's intention for 70% of African American women to spend their entire lives with no romance, with no community from the opposite sex? How does preaching look? how does liberation look in that lens? That's a question I think we don't wrestle with enough.
Right, and I think I piggyback on that by quoting, and I cannot think of the author's name, but he wrote Inconvenient Hero about Martin King, and he makes the statement, do you want to be free or do you want everybody to be free? And so when you wrestle with the concept of liberation, liberation is not merely individual. It has to be communal. It has to speak of the collective. So I think that's a part of the wrestling, which is why there's an empathy that is necessary when it comes to talking about liberation. So as you so brilliantly started unpacking, one of the things we overlook, I did this piece last night at DART, Dallas Area Rapid Transit, where they are cutting services on the side of town that not only needs services the most, but basically funds the whole system. They're trying to cut services and raise prices on our side of town. So my thing was, it's really a trip how y'all sitting up here, and I pulled a Danielle Brown, and I drove here. All of you on this board drove here, and you are making decisions for folk who can't drive here. Do you want to be free or do you want everybody to be free? And freedom has to do with, and here's a definition that I get a remix, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. He said that freedom is not an external adjustment, it's an internal achievement. We talk about the external adjustment, fighting Pharaoh, but you've got to have an internal achievement, because in Exodus chapter 6, what's interesting is that when Moses went to the people of God, they were so broken in spirit, they could not receive liberation because it requires an internal achievement. And the Savior I follow, who's my ultimate liberator, does something strange with the word freedom. He said, you shall know the truth. You shall be intimate with truth, and the truth will set you free. So if the truth sets you free, lies lock you up. Oppression is a lie. It's a lie that sins against humanity, and so there must be a wrestling with this concept of liberation. Now, here's what I want to do, and that is liberation and culture. It makes me rush to Galatians, because Paul is saying to those Judaizing Christians, don't make Gentiles leave their culture to become you in order to connect with Christ. One of the most evil, diabolical things that has been done in this country is that white Christian nationalism baptized their bigotry, baptized a bigoted hermeneutic, and then gave us white Jesus in their image and in their likeness, and said, if you Africans, where Christianity really started, but if you Africans are going to be saved, you've got to give up your Africanity in order to be a Christian. As a matter of fact, you have to take on the culture of white supremacy if you are to truly be Christian. So read the Bible through a white supremacist hermeneutic lens. See God as a big white person in the sky who is judging you because of the color of your skin. And so one of the liberations we need is a freedom from believing that our culture is a sin, because if our culture is a sin, it means their culture is saintly and angelic, and God made all of us out of one blood. And since God did that, your culture ain't better than mine, and I don't have to become you in order to be Jesus, be like Christ, because Christ made me in his image and in his likeness. And in light of that, check this. Last night, I told Brian Carter I was going to walk in shouting to hear these super bad sisters preaching at the E.K. Bailey Conference in Dallas, Texas. And what made me doubly shout is that neither one of them tried to be men, because they've been set free. And when the Son sets you free, you are free indeed, and you're free to hold on to who you are as you embrace whose you are.
My God. Thank you, Dr. Haynes. That is a much needed word as we are on college campuses through our HBCU tour, we contend with this question constantly. Students thinking that Christianity is a white man's religion and walking away from the faith because of iconography and the ways in which white supremacy has hijacked Christian theology. And so your word is very much needed for the cultural moment today, especially for the next generation. When we talk about empathy, as has been talked about already on this panel, what role does lament and prophetic witness play in the church's engagement with issues of injustice inspired by the spirit of Exodus? Exodus.
I think it's so important. We don't talk enough about lamenting. When you think about 400 years of oppression, we have been taught just to keep it moving.
Yeah, that's right.
And when you unpack what has happened from the transatlantic, from the slave trades to slavery to fighting of the Civil War to fighting in every war this country has participated in while being denied equity. When you think about just what we've seen in terms of lynchings and murder, and just 60 years ago, gaining civil rights, I don't think we really have unpacked enough the trauma, the systemic and institutional trauma, and too many others are saying, just get over it. And too many of our own people are saying, stop being the victim. As if you don't acknowledge 400 years of demonic tenets and demonic perspectives toward us. And I think we spend so much time sometimes in church celebrating, but lament is a necessary reaction. We haven't really lamented COVID. It's going to take us 20, 25 years to really unpack psychologically the effects and the impact that COVID has had on us. And so I think by not teaching lament, because we are so used to celebrating and giving hope, and I think while we still need to continue to give hope, we need to emphasize the importance of lament, because if not, we're not going to be whole in terms of our own souls. And I think we don't get the healing that we need because of the importance of lamenting and sitting with it and feeling it. If we don't do that, I think it's going to continue to put trauma on top of trauma without ever unpacking and getting to a place of healing.
That's helpful. Dr. Gardner.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Lamenting is also understanding, or being willing to understand human conditions and experiences. My colleague Malcolm Foley has written a book entitled The Anti-Greed Gospel. In that book, he talks about first order suffering that we all experience, hurricanes, disease. Second order suffering is suffering that we inflict on one another. But then there's third order suffering that comes as a result of that: mental illness, drug addictions. We have to have preachers and Christians who understand that when a person has a mental illness, it's not their fault. When people are addicted to drugs, it shouldn't be criminalized, right? So as we lament, it gives some empathy to our preaching, and we have too many preachers can say it, they can do it on the back end, but they don't connect the dots. They do not connect the dots. Poverty, when you live in perpetual poverty, when you have all you've seen is poverty, smelt is poverty, when you lived in war zones, I can understand why drug addiction can sometimes feel like an escape. It's not, I don't consent to it. But in my preaching and in my ministering, I dare not victimize. I dare not dehumanize. I dare not blame that sister or that brother that's experiencing that. So I think that we preach, but do we know and do we understand? And as we engage in prophetic proclamation, is there enough empathy in our preaching that's connected to us understanding these issues, right?
Thank you.
I would add to that the idea of leaving something that you've known and going to an unknown place creates its own space for lament, and that's okay. I even find myself sometimes demonizing the Israelites. Why do they want to go back to Egypt? Why would they want to go back to slavery? But even a good God decision can cause grief. When you release anything and embrace anything, there's grief. There's grief when you leave a bad job and go to a new job. You can be excited about that new job and still grieve what was. And I think this idea, you listen to like the spirituals, you know, and the minor tones, when Enoch was in Egypt land. It's just a very grieving space. It makes me think of my family leaving slavery in the early 1900s, making their great migration from North and South Carolina to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They were leaving behind what they knew. They were free, but there was a grief walk all the way to Pittsburgh. And what do when they get to Pittsburgh? They start soul food restaurants. They start churches. They start the things that kept them to what they knew. They were happy. They were grateful, but there was grief. And I pray the church can make room for grief, room to grieve in infertility and miscarriages, room to grieve even the things we've left behind, room to grieve the lost loved ones. Thank you for bringing COVID up. I still grieve having to do funerals on Zoom. I grieve my babies. My youngest daughter was in kindergarten during COVID. And still today, I look at her generation, they all have social issues because they couldn't sit on the carpet and learn to share their crayons, and they couldn't get up to the wall and say what day it was. I grieve that. I grieve right now. And if we don't make room for grief in the church, then we succumb to triumphalism. And we think every day is supposed to be a good day and we're more than conquerors through him. Yes, and Jesus wept. And may there always be a space, even when we transition to good things. May Exodus teach us that we can grieve walking through the Red Sea. We can grieve making it to the promised land. And when we settle ourselves, let us never forget all that was lost on the journey.
Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes wrote a book called Too Heavy a Yoke that I recommend for everyone to read. But it calls out this myth of the strong black woman and identifies the ways that it is killing us. This perpetual pushing through and not taking moments to care for ourselves or to pause and acknowledge hurt in the ways that it plays out also in our bodies, right? And I think that when we do not create space for lament, when it comes to liberation and just living in this world, we rob ourselves of the opportunity for God's strength to be made perfect in our weakness. Right? That if his strength is made perfect in our weakness and we're always strong, then we're not leaning into that strength. Right? Walter Brueggemann says that lament is refusal to accept things the way they are. Yeah. And that's what we see God doing in Exodus. That God, and sometimes we talk about the lament of the people, and that the people were in a bad shape, but God laments with us. That when we are not well, when we're not good, that impacts God deeply. And so we see throughout Exodus, God making ways, right? Pillar of cloud, a pillar of fire by night, cloud by day, right? We see God making room, opening the Red Sea, doing all of the things that God did because God refused to allow things to remain as they were. There's this other part for us as people who will work in this liberation space and we want to preach and lead faithfully. Is this prophetic work a box to check? Or is it something we feel so deeply inside that if we don't get the applause, we would still work for the liberation of our people? Because my concern is that there is a way, and we call it prophetic preaching. We say that's, liberation work, and that's justice work. And sometimes I wonder if it's just a box to check, because that's what a black preacher is supposed to do. That's what the black preacher is supposed to say. But real lament is something that you feel deeply inside. It is a refusal to allow your people to not be well, and you will do anything to make sure that they are. So lament has to be, right, a part, intrinsic part of the leader who is doing this prophetic work. That there's something about the condition of the world that must grieve us in real ways, not performative ways, right? So people say, oh yeah, that's our justice preacher there. But in real ways, that if there's no applause, if there's no crowd that rallies around to say, you are the one, we crown you, our new leader, that you'll still do this work. That's.
And I'll piggyback on that with this because it just kind of hit me as you were talking, Dee, and that is that if you love, you can't help but lament what you see that shouldn't be, that defaces, humanity created in the image and likeness of God. So you can't get to liberation without lament, and you can't lament without love. And so it makes you question, okay, again, are we doing this because, we're supposed to do it? Or is it out of the love that comes from the heart of a God who so loved us? And so for me, as you were talking, I kept thinking about the fact that, okay, I lament not just the personal pain, but the conditions that create the pain. So therefore, I don't judge someone's choices if I'm clueless about their options, because a lot of systems have created options that limit choices. And so if you limit my choices in the context of systemic injustice, then my options basically say my choices are this or that, and then I get judged for choices. And so I lament choices, or I lament options that limit choices. I think about the fact that there is in Louisiana a place called Cancer Alley, where people are dying every single day because of environmental racism, a Pharaoh, environmental racism that basically allows us, because it's us who live there, to inhale air that is unhealthy. I'll see if I can make this real plain. There is a place in Dallas, Pastor Carter, very much a part of this in terms of getting rid of it, that was called Shingle Mountain. Dallas, Texas had a mountain that went 10 stories high of shingles from rooftops that came from the north part of town. They put them on the south side of town, right next door to a member of my church. She gets lung disease. The question is, do I just pray for her and healing her lung disease, or do I fight a system that created the zoning that allowed for a mountain of, imagine a mountain of shingles from rooftops in the summer heat in Dallas, and you living next door inhaling the toxins. So I lament. I love the community and my member enough to say, we got to do something about this. I lamented what she was experiencing, and then I was led by God to say, we got to do something about this. I prayed for her healing, but I also made sure we got rid of that mountain, because that mountain was doing damage to the humanity of those created in the image and likeness of God. All I'm saying simply is this, that when you love, because God's love is in you, you cannot help but lament any conditions that deface humanity made in the image and likeness of God. And then you've got to be led to get up and do something about it. Because right there in the biblical text, God says, I've seen the affliction of my people. He's lamenting. I've heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, and I'm coming down to deliver them. God is lamenting, loving, and led to do something about it.
Amen. I think that's so important, that embodiment piece. We recently surveyed students at Morehouse, Spelman, and Clark Atlanta and asked them what is their greatest obstacle to embracing Jesus fully, 50% said the way in which Christians live, that we don't practice what we preach. We gave them a ton of logical issues. Did they have an issue with the Bible, the issue with theology? It all boiled down to the way we practice. And it leads us to 1 Peter 3:15, where it says, be able to give a defense for the hope that we have when we're questioned, but nobody will ask us about a hope we don't demonstrate. And so if we want to draw people into the faith, we have to embody it with love and lament. My next question is, how does the giving of the law at Sinai in Exodus provide a framework for ethical living and community building in a world striving for justice and order?
You know, when I think about communal living and when I think about the world, particularly in America, I'm challenged when we try to, and I get a lot of pushback from this, but this is my perspective. I'm challenged when we try to integrate personal theology with public policy. Because the way the law came down from Sinai, it still has to be communicated and articulated by human beings. And so this present administration has surrounded itself with people who are communicators of the laws that came down from Mount Sinai. So if that person is the theological mouthpiece for the administration, but while they're interpreting laws, ethical laws that they think came down from Mount Sinai, while simultaneously calling for angels from Africa to come and engage in a political process. The challenge is whenever you use personal theology for the basis of public policy, the issue is always going to be this: whose theology are you going to use?
That's right.
The theology of Bull Connor, who was a deacon in this church on Sundays, but put German shepherds and fire hoses on boys and girls in the park, Killingham Park in Birmingham. Whose theology are we going to use? Is the theology of the Southern Baptists that says a woman can't be in leadership? And hence many didn't vote for Hillary or for Kamala in the name of women are too emotional? Well, what in the Gehenna do we think we got in the White House right now? So you're going to always have an issue, in my opinion, of whose interpretation. There are pastors right here in Dallas, in Atlanta. Do we want them being the interpreters of the laws that we think that come down from Sinai? We had people to do that that's why the Southern Baptist split. Whose theology would, a lot of the Southern Baptist seminaries, they're named in honor of persons who own slaves. So it's going to always be an issue. Slave ships went to Africa with the name Jesus. All religion ain't good religion. And so I'm just concerned about how do we use theology for the basis of public policy in this world when we see that people who are interpreting theology, many of them, their lens we can't trust.
Doc, thank you. Because we're in a state, Pastor Carter will go with me on this. We're in a state in the most recent legislative session, it's now law that the 10 Commandments are posted in classrooms. That's the law. In this state, thou shalt not kill, okay. But you cut the budget of those whose weather service positions would have allowed for persons to be notified in the hill country about the coming flood that just took place. Thou shalt not kill. So you putting up the 10 commandments in every classroom, and here it is, without a sense of the context in which those commandments were given. I give it to you like this. James Baldwin said the most dangerous person in the world is the one who ain't got nothing to lose. Here I am, extricated, emancipated from Egyptian enslavement, heading into a wilderness, being led by God, and it's like, and Doc, you own that thing. It's like, okay, I'm going where I don't know, and I ain't got nothing to lose. I'm still internalizing oppression, as Pharaohs says in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I've internalized oppression, and I ain't got nothing to lose out here, so I'm always trying to go back. I'm always complaining about where I am because I don't know where I'm going. I don't trust this dude who said he had this encounter with God on the backside of a desert, and so I'm always trying to go back to what I understood. And so God says what I'm going to have to do, and here's the context, and I got this from Johnny Ray Youngblood. Keith Youngblood preached for us during the Ma'afa, came to Friendship West Ma'afa, which takes us back. It's a Sankofa where we look back to move forward. And he kills me because we're doing this whole thing on enslavement, oppression, Ma'afa, 400-year Holocaust, Dante King calls it. And he preaches on the 10 Commandments. And I'm like, how you gonna preach on the 10 Commandments and we dealing with liberation? And Blood explained, here it is, that because you've internalized oppression, because you see yourself as less than human, it's been imputed onto you by your oppressor. You don't have a sense of standards that you live by. And so the 10 Commandments provide you with external standards that are a reflection of an internal commitment to an eternal God. And so if you're gonna put 10 commandments on the wall in school, at least educate them about the context of oppression. Oh, you don't wanna do that because that oppression will make you think about the oppression you're continuously doing to black folk in this country right now. So if you're gonna put the 10 commandments up there, at least teach the context of oppression. And then when you teach that context, you have external standards to inform your internal convictions. I gotta go here. Lauren Hill, how you gonna win if you ain't right within? So the commandments are helping us to get right within, but it's who's interpreting. Who's interpreting? Jeremiah Wright puts it like this. Paula White's God ain't the same God of Danielle Brown. Robert Jeffries and Dewey Smith don't worship the same God. And I'm calling them out right now because you can't worship the same God, put up those commandments without context. Thank you.
Thank you. We're running out of time, but I want to ask this last question. Many of the people in the room are going back to various contexts. Some people in the room pastor multi-ethnic churches. Some people in the room pastor black churches that are more conservative and they don't like to hear a lot of liberation. So there's a diversity even amongst our communities. How would you instruct those who are in a diverse community to preach liberation and to integrate this in their context?
I would say remember to stay close to those who need the gospel the most. I mean, a lot of what we've talked about has everything to do with proximity. The farther away we go from those who are truly oppressed, the less we know about what oppression looks like, feels like. I have been in those contexts. I've been in those multicultural settings. I've been in those more conservative settings. And in each case, they tend to succumb to what some have called a toxic charity. So I serve at the soup kitchen therefore I'm doing my part. No, no, no. Real liberation looks like feeling what they feel, walking where they walk, being where they are, understanding that it's not just a meal that they need. They need sometimes immigration lawyers. They need sometimes mental health support. Sometimes they need job reentry programs. There are so many amazing models of churches, Friendship West being one of them, where churches have been able to build into the ministry of the church a true liberation. And I would say for those of you listening, look at the models of churches that are doing liberation work, not just through soup kitchens and clothing drives, though those are good starts, but look at the ones that take it farther to arguing and making sure that people get off of death row, to making sure that they actually pass laws to end human trafficking, coming alongside families who are broken through all kinds of ways. That's what liberation looks like. And I would also say, don't give up. Because liberation does not happen overnight. You're not gonna go back to your church from this conference, start next Sunday on a sermon series, and then start seeing chains break. Sometimes liberation takes time. Sometimes liberation takes generations. So what does it look like for us to go back into our context and plant seeds of liberation so that our children's children would know the narratives of Exodus? That's what it looks like. And it's gonna be different for all of us because we all start in different places, but we have to start.
Well, let's give a hand for this amazing panel.